right, it's just about 1 p.m., so we'll get started. You'll soon be seeing a sign-up form shared in the chat box of Zoom. So if everyone could just, as we're going through the logistics and ground rules, if you don't mind, just sharing your name and organization so that we can add you to the e-list, that will be helpful. All right. So just a reminder that this is a recorded meeting, so that for those who weren't able to join us today, they are able to view it at a later time, or that anyone else can review it, you know, going back and looking at any notes that needed to be recorded again. Right now, I know for those who are calling in, you might have just heard me say that we have a sign-in sheet going around, but you won't be able to access that since we're just in the chat. Since we'll be posting it in the chat. Since we don't have too many people on the phone, I'm just going to record their names really quickly. So for the person who's at 303-525-1550, do you mind let's see, I'm going to unmute you right now. Oh, just kidding, I can't unmute you. If you don't mind just unmuting yourself by pressing *6 and letting us know your name and organization, that'd be great. Again, that's for the phone number, the last 4 digits are 1550, whoever is at that phone number.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, thank
Hello?
you.
Oh, sorry, Julie Tonetti, Centennial Water and Sanitation District.
Awesome, thanks, Julie. All right, and that is the only individual we have on the phone. So Julie, let us know, you know, I don't think you're on, it looks like you're just on the phone. So, you know, we will be having a lot of Zoom polls today, so it may be a little bit more difficult for you to participate. However, we'd still love to get your comments and feedback, so I'll, you know, as you see fit, feel free to unmute yourself and let us know. Or if even better, if you press *9, then you can raise your hand and then we can call on you. That's probably the best approach. So I'll move on, and then I'll repeat the logistics soon, Julie. So plan for Zoom bombing. You guys all may have heard, you know, this happened more often in March and April, that there were individuals who attended meetings just for the sole purpose of interrupting them with inappropriate material. So if that were to happen, what we'll do is we'll make sure that everyone is muted, and that all we have to do is then communicate through chat, which isn't as convenient. But it's something, and then if that still isn't working, then we'll have to reschedule the meeting and send out more security precautions such as passwords for the meeting, which we don't do originally because we would like this meeting to be more public and accessible. So this is the agenda for today. We'll be just again reviewing the ground rules and logistics as we do for every stakeholder meeting. Then we'll be going through the really just a series of questions and feedback activities that we have planned for you. We want to try to capture everyone's thoughts on this rulemaking and this regulation. So then we'll just be doing a wrap up and having just a robust discussion, and then any closing remarks. So ground rules, please, if you can mute yourself when not speaking, that will just make sure that there isn't any background noise that might then be distracting others. Feel free to use the phone or the chat box during this, and when I say use the phone or chat box, meaning you can use your computer audio as well, or the phone. We take anything. It does help if you raise your hand. To raise your hand, you can go to the participants box and press the little hand icon that's next to the mic icon. That will just help us organize those who to call on. But you know, you're certainly welcome to press to unmute yourself and speak up as well. When you do speak up, please introduce yourself. This just helps everyone try to track the conversation better, since this is completely online. And for the most part, you know, everyone is showing their faces. It just really helps for those just who are listening and to be able to track who is saying what. Sticking to the topics on the agenda, that everyone's time is precious, and so by keeping answers and comments short and concise and on topic, we'll just make sure that this meeting goes quickly and efficiently. We've got a lot to cover today, so that's super important. And then number one rule is respecting all the ideas and others. And then the last one, just keep in mind, ground rule, we put it in there, game plan for Zoom bombing. So Julie, you successfully unmuted yourself again. You pressed *6 to mute and unmute yourself. You did that great just a moment ago. And then again, to raise your hand versus using the computer icon, you instead would use *9 to raise it, and we would then be able to call on you. Just a quick slide here that shows where the chat box is for those who are looking at the presentation. That's and whoever is new to Zoom chat. So right now, the sign-in sheet was just linked for everyone. So to find that sign-in sheet, please go to the chat and then just fill your name out. That will just help us, again, add you to the eListserv so that you can receive future updates on these meetings. Thank you. With that, we'll go into introductions. So Brandy, mind starting us off?
Yep. Hi, everyone. It's Brandy Honeycutt with the Water Quality Control Division.
Great. Meg? Oh, Meg, I don't know if you're muted, but I saw you on earlier.
Hi, this is Meg Parrish. I'm the Permit Section Manager with the Water Quality Control Division. Thank you so much for being here this morning, or this afternoon.
Great, thanks, Meg. Liz?
This is Liz Lamont. I'm with Clean Water Compliance with the Water Quality Control Division.
Great. Nathan?
Nathan Moore, the Clean Water Compliance and Enforcement Section Manager.
Perfect. And then my name is Marianne Nason. I don't even think I said that at the beginning, but I will be helping Brandy just organize this meeting. And then big thanks to Caitlin Beekman, and then Contessa Rodriguez also is on the line. Sorry, Contessa, joining us last minute, but we weren't able to get your name up. Sorry about that. So we've got these two helping us in the back end, which is a huge help for us. And they make sure that all the materials are posted online and everything is organized. So thank you. All right. There we go. Brandy, go for it.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much for being here today. And for those of you who received the assignment that we sent out, I hope that wasn't terribly annoying. But, you know, thank you for looking at that and thinking about that in advance of the meeting. So the goals of this meeting today are really to see whether or not, sort of take a poll to see if you agree or disagree with some of the suggestions the division has. We want to collect your ideas as well, and we will be taking a couple of Zoom polls and allowing for discussion for sort of items around definitions in Reg 84, some clarification items, best management practices or additional conditions, if you will, sort of some broadened applicability items, and then regulation structure. So if you guys recall, this was one of these are some of the topics that we agreed on last time about what, and so kind of trying to get that in today. So before though we move on, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the topics that we decided to focus on in the last meeting was adding new uses, and taking this opportunity to, you know, discuss ways that we might be able to do that going in the future without having, you know, taking and sort of look at the regulation, or maybe restructure the regulation in a way that's a little bit more risk-based. And the division is definitely open to having those discussions, and we are planning on doing that. We're kind of holding off. If you remember the timeline, we're having, you know, two more meetings after today. And then we're going to take some time to go back to the drawing board internally at the division, and then come back out and do more stakeholder work next year. And so I'm kind of calling that phase 2 is what we're calling that. And so that is when we anticipate that we will talk about that focus area, the adding new uses and, you know, kind of the risk-based approach. So just FYI, that is something we want to do, and it is something we're planning on doing. And, you know, hopefully the things that we work on in these next few meetings today and the next two will like help. And so I guess I ask that, you know, we sort of keep that in the back of our minds as we think about things. All right, next slide, Marianne. So first, I'm going to go over some definitions from Regulation 84, some that maybe should we suggest could be removed, and others that we suggest should be added or edited, and then just some other recommendations from the division. And we're going to take Zoom polls to get your opinions on these items, whether or not you agree or disagree, and then if we find any disagreement, we would like to hear your thoughts on that and why. So we will be kind of calling on folks to bring us that feedback during this time. And so, yeah, so we're going to start there. Next slide, Marianne.
And Brandy, can I just ask if I think when we talked about this, that it's okay to disagree with it. These are just ideas put out, just splashed on the wall just for a reaction, because it's a lot easier to say yes or no to something when something is actually developed versus trying to brainstorm from scratch, which can be a little bit more difficult when we have so many stakeholders involved, and which is always a good thing. So we thought this might be the better approach to try to get input and feedback quickly, but always looking for more feedback if this process doesn't even work. So please, you know, let us know. Brandy, correct me if I said anything incorrectly.
That was very well said, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay, great.
So first, actually, we're going to do a test Zoom poll. So Caitlin, if you could queue up that test question, we just want to make sure that this works for everybody. So Caitlin, it might even be, okay. There we go. Looks like it's working.
Perfect. And while people are doing that, we have Miller. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
This is Gail McGaha Miller with Platte River Power Authority. I was just wondering if you were had any guidelines on how many people per organization were expected to weigh in on these polls. Is it one vote per organization?
Oh, I see. No, I think we would like for every individual to weigh in and hear everyone's thoughts. So,
thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thanks for asking. That's a good question.
And sorry, Gail, that I got your name wrong. If anyone sees their name incorrectly written in the participant list, feel free, you can rename yourself so I can get it right the next time. So thanks for that. So right now we have about 14 votes out of 24 participants. And then Julie, I know you won't be able to vote on this. So I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes. If everyone can just try voting, that would make sure. Oh, I guess it's 16 out of 20. I'm sorry. The 24 participants, the other 4 are CDPHE staff, and you guys don't get to vote. Sorry. All right. So everyone should see the poll results on their end. If anyone isn't seeing the poll results, please either chat us or raise your hand. Okay, that's a good thing. I didn't see any hands raised, so that tells me everyone was able to see the results. All right.
Okay, I think we're done with this question. We can move on to the difficult ones. Just kidding. All right. Let's see. Okay, so there are some definitions here that we suggest could be removed. We think that, you know, a user is a user in Regulation 84. Additionally, you know, agricultural irrigation user was defined, commercial user, you see them listed here. You I think, and the next slide will actually have a proposed definition of user, but we thought that these could be removed and are not necessary. Another definition that we actually created during the last rulemaking was for cultivator. And throughout the regulation, we do talk about cultivators and some of the requirements for food crops. But again, we thought that, cultivator is a user. And so if the word user could encompass all of these, then we wouldn't need these. So our question to you would be, do you agree or disagree that we should remove these definitions? So Caitlin will do the poll now.
Hello, this is Gail again. It's too bad you don't have a choice of it depends because it kind of depends on whether you keep table A or not. It depends on how we apply the different requirements for the different categories, going back to a risk-based kind of approach.
Okay, yeah, so if we keep table A, the additional conditions in that table apply to the use itself. And I guess any user that was practicing any of those uses would be responsible for implementing those additional conditions, is my thought. I don't know, what do you think of that?
Oh, so you're differentiating between use and user.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yes.
That's what we want to hear. We want that feedback. So thank you, Gail.
Yeah. And it looks like Sunny raised her hand.
Yeah, I did. I'm with Gail. I agree with removing part of these, but not all of them. So your poll of agree and disagree could be misleading. Like, I think we should get rid of the first bullet, the ag, the commercial, the industrial, and the landscape. But I also see that cultivator may still be needed depending on how user is rewritten and for certain uses. So
Okay.
I don't know how to answer your poll, I guess, if you want that to be an agree or a disagree.
I suppose I would consider that a disagree. So if anyone has any, I guess, comments about, or is on the fence about it with some circumstances, then perhaps put disagree so we can hear about that. That's kind of the point of disagree. So if everyone's okay with that, that's how we'll proceed. And I didn't think about it in between options, so we don't have that set up today. We'll know for next time. Does anyone else that disagrees have any comments about our suggestion here? Okay, we'll move on. And of course, you can always contact me later if you think of something or a light bulb goes off. Yes.
I just want to make sure for those who do agree, did anyone maybe have, a comment that they'd like to share before we move on, just to make sure we hear maybe a different side too. No worries if no one wants to comment. All right, thanks. And Janine, just to make sure, I still see your hand raised. So is it something that we should, do you still have a question or comment, or is that something we can lower the hand?
No, sorry, I just forgot to lower my hand. I'll do that right now.
Okay, great, perfect. All right, we'll move on then.
Slide. All right, so we have a new proposed definition for user. The current definition is the entity or person legally responsible for a site that uses reclaimed water for the purpose of uses identified in section 84.9. A user may also be a treater. And the proposed definition would be any individual, entity, and or operator that uses reclaimed water and is responsible for compliance with Regulation 84 and implementing the requirements in 84.9. So I guess the main difference here is that, you know, it includes an individual or an entity or the operator. And really it's responsible for compliance with Regulation 84, not just the requirements in 84.9. Now, the user would not necessarily be responsible for meeting the E. coli standards at the treatment facility. So, you know, there could be some, you know, issues with what we're proposing there. You know, the users are mainly responsible for the requirements in 84.9 and 84.12, which is the user plan to comply requirements currently. But anyhow, so this is just an idea, and we'd love to hear what you think. So, Caitlin, if you can pull up that Zoom poll.
Perfect. Sherry, I see your hand raised, and then we'll move on to Galen.
Had to find the mute button. So I guess I was kind of in agreement with this, being that it kind of was not the same until you said what you just said, in that a user isn't necessarily going to have any control over the requirements of E. coli, for one, turbidity, or disinfection, any of that. So I'm not sure we really want to make it. I'm not sure my users would be comfortable saying that they were responsible for those things.
Right, right. So yeah, so maybe it's not so much the entire regulation. I mean, we originally had it called out as section 84.9. You know, if we keep table A and the additional conditions in the as they are, then we could still refer to it in the definition there. You know, or if we decided to create a section called user responsibilities in the reg, then we could just say in the definition, you know, responsible for those items listed there, which would obviously include the best management practices to be implemented correctly. Yeah, I'd love to hear what other people think about that, if they, or any of the other thoughts. Thank you, Sherry.
Yeah, Gail here again. I agree with Sherry. The way the proposed definition is written, it does imply that all compliance is the responsibility of the user. I'd rather see it be tweaked to say something more like the user is responsible for compliance with the UBC, or the user is responsible for the best management practices, or, you know, section XYZ. This is too broad and leaves the user vulnerable to things over which they have no control.
Okay. All right. Looks like we have someone else raise their hand there.
That's me again, Brandy. This is Donine. I do actually like the definition, but I think it does need to be changed. I personally think my users should be aware of the entire regulation, not just sections thereof. They may not be responsible for the whole regulation, but I spend a lot of time explaining the difference of what a treater has to comply with and what they have to comply with, because they never take the time to read anything except what they're responsible for. So maybe, I know we can't legislate understanding or make it a compliance of understanding, but at least put something in there, must be aware with the requirements of Regulation 84 and implement the requirements, the user requirements in section whatever it will be.
Okay, that makes
Wouldn't that come under the requirements for the site manager and or the training and education that is required of the user, rather than putting it in the, it's almost as if the definition is being used to force an understanding rather than putting that requirement elsewhere.
And it sounds like that was Gail again speaking.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Gail.
Thanks, Gail.
Gail, I can see that if you have site managers for every site, but currently my system does not have site managers. We have what I really consider true just users. They're not enforcing inspections. I mean, they may walk their site to look for leaking heads, but they're not really a site manager. They're just a user. And as much as I educate, they still don't understand that it's not me putting these BMPs onto them. There is a regulation that tells me as the treater to a point what I need to enforce on.
Sure, that makes sense. It just doesn't seem like the definitions is the correct place to make that happen, the correct mechanism.
And you may be right. Yeah, I can see that.
So that was between, sorry everyone, Deneen and Gail. So just want to make sure, Brandy or Meg, do you guys have any questions, you know, with what these guys were just saying? Just trying to tie up the conversation so that we know maybe what to take out of it.
No, I think that's valuable feedback. I think maybe let's, you know, Brandy's going to work through some of our other proposals, and I think, you know, nothing that you sort of say in the poll is written in stone. If you have bigger comments, you know, feel free to send Brandy an email afterwards. And we're, you know, we're recording this, all of the conversation we're listening to as well. So I thought that was really helpful, and will inform some of the other sections we'll be talking about later.
Yep.
Thanks.
I agree. It was very helpful. All right, we'll move to the next.
Real quick, sorry, Sherry, I see your hand is still raised, and yours too, Deneen. I just want to make sure that we addressed everything that you guys had.
Sorry, I forgot to lower it.
No worries, just want to make sure we're not missing anyone. And then did everyone, for those who might have agreed with this, did anyone have any comments or thoughts maybe they'd like to share? All right, we'll go ahead and move forward.
All right, so speaking of best management practices or additional conditions, there isn't currently a definition for additional conditions, although under Table A in Regulation 84, there is a sort of a description of what they are. So we looked at the EPA's definition of best management practices for wastewater permits and sort of developed this definition. So schedules of activities, prohibitions of practices, maintenance procedures, and other management practices associated to the uses of reclaimed water that must be implemented by treaters, users, site managers, and legal responsible entities in order to be in compliance with Regulation 84. So this really encompasses the fact that, you know, users must implement these practices. So do site managers. Pretty much everyone needs to be on board with making sure they are being practiced. So with that, we will get your opinions. Caitlin, let's go ahead and do that poll. I feel like a game show host.
Hey, Brandy, it's Brett. City of Westminster.
Hey, Brett.
On the scheduling of activities, so would that mean to like our parks, when they're going to have soccer games, practices, and that kind of things, that we need to know those schedule of those type of activities?
No, I don't think that's not what I was in, my intention, and I don't think that's what the EPA means either. In terms of schedules of activities, I think it means something like regular review of the irrigation system, like a schedule to look at for leaks, right?
Weekly irrigation checks or whatever, okay.
Yeah, that kind of schedule of activities.
All right,
Not,
cool, thank you.
Randy, this is John Hanzo at Aurora Water. How does best management practices fit with alternative conditions? Can you explain the difference or similarities?
well, we actually are going to talk about this very shortly as to what we want to call these in the regulation, because yeah, I mean, they're technically, they've been sort of referred to as the same thing, the conditions listed in section 84.9 under the table. And yeah, there's been some confusion because we've referred to it in both ways. So we are going to try to, we're going to get some ideas here in just a little bit, a few slides from now, and use Jamboard to collect ideas of one term that we should call these practices. Does that help, John?
Yes, it does. I'm glad that you are going to come down to one term for both of these, but as you've pointed out here, that this definition of best management practices is an EPA definition and actually does have some enforceability with it from a compliance standpoint, whereas the alternative conditions, those are hard and fast conditions within the regulations. There's a subtle difference between how they're used. So alternative conditions are they're mandatory part of the regulations. They are regulations. If you turn around and talk about best management practices, they're kind of surrogate for and I don't know if you want to call them limits, but Nathan, maybe you can help me out here as far as how I'm thinking about this, with the fact that if you require somebody to do a best management practice, that it actually has some compliance enforceability associated with it.
So in other rules, like the discharge current rules for stormwater and MS4, we use the term control measure, which is replace those management practices for most of our permits, and those are essentially the activities and actions taken, and I'm playing this in paraphrasing, activities and actions taken by the permittee to meet the effluent limits of the permit. So the requirement is, so it's just, so in other words, the BMPs is just a general terminology to capture those requirements. And in itself is, the definition isn't a requirement. It just defines that it just puts a term to those requirements. So in other words, by defining BMPs, you're not placing any new requirement in the rules. You're just referencing requirements existing already.
All right. So it looks like we've got almost everyone answered. Are there any other comments on this definition for the term that we haven't defined? All right, then. We shall move on. Marianne, if you could go to the next slide, please. So there's this term that we put into regulation as we have been working with Aurora Water on the approved use of oil and gas operations, and that is the term conveyance. For those of you who may not know, there's what we call lay flat hoses that are used to deliver reclaimed water to these oil and gas sites, and they extend for quite a long distance, sometimes miles, oftentimes miles. And so we ended up adding the term conveyance to site the definition of site in Regulation 84 because reclaimed water is being delivered through this lay flat hose and therefore needs to be regulated under Regulation 84. So it's kind of part of the site. So anyway, this term I thought could be applied in other ways and areas. Just as a simple term, conveyance, any mechanism through which reclaimed water is transported. I don't know. I think it could apply to other things, and I'm not sure what the future looks like in terms of temporary conveyance, but I thought it would be good to have the definition also for oil and gas, but maybe in the future as well. So with that, let's see if everyone agrees or disagrees and what your thoughts are.
Randy, this is John Hanzo again. When you say the mechanism through which reclaimed water is transported, isn't that also the distribution system?
That would. Yes, that would, sounds like it would fit right in there.
However, in the definition of site for oil and gas operations, it was used as a temporary system, temporary lay flat hose specifically. So, you know, temporary versus permanent installation isn't that an issue here with the term conveyance?
That very well may be. I didn't think about that. Yes, because certain requirements that would apply to a temporary conveyance certainly wouldn't always or ever really at times apply to a permanent distribution system. So definitely something to rethink here.
Yeah, Gail McGaha Miller again. In other regulations, conveyance can apply to pipelines, permanent pipelines as well. So if the intent is to apply this to the temporary systems, it should be called out as such. Having said that, depending on how this regulation would apply to conveyances, it could be very helpful where you've got situations like pipelines carrying Reg 84 water that sort of fall into a regulatory gray area. We actually have a large pipeline that is currently being regulated as a wastewater treatment plant because it didn't really fall cleanly under anything else. And so this could be very helpful that way if it applies to those kinds of permanent structures and depending on how the regulations are applied to it.
Thanks, guys. I can see, I think Brandy's diligently writing notes.
Yes, even though this is recorded, I still need to. Okay. What other thoughts do folks have on this? Sherry.
I think that it totally depends on what I think somebody already said, but it depends on what you're going to regulate. If you're going to start regulating the conveyance, that is then I agree or disagree depending on that. And so, like, I understand why we put it in for the lay flat lines. That was a totally different, like, it's above ground and you could walk on it, you could step on it, you could poke it, whatever. But as far as like the pipe underground, I don't know that we need to call it something. So I think you guys just need to think about what that means and then we need to decide from there.
Okay, yeah, duly noted for sure. All right. Well, if no one else has anything here, we'll move on.
Again, anyone who agrees with this, does anyone want to say any comments or thoughts? All right, I'll stop asking moving forward, but feel free for anyone who does agree with anything or just wants to say something, feel free to do so.
Okay, so the next question is about defining a legally responsible person in the definitions section of Regulation 84. This definition was actually taken from the user plan to comply. You know, a legal representative for the user organization, site, and/or facility that has authority to make legally binding commitments for the user or treater. Yeah, just really thought that this would be an appropriate definition to have in the actual regulation. So let's go ahead and take our poll on that.
Randy, this is John again. Clarification, you've got at the very end of it, or treater. Is this looking at a way of separating user from treater, or are we adding user and treater together here? I was a little concerned about the fact that you've got that the word treater in there as a legal responsible person when, you know, the treater is also dealt with from the, you know, permitting side of other regulations and the definition of responsible party in there. So I was kind of unsure about this, and I was hoping you could give some further clarification about how you're using the word treater for legally responsible person here.
Okay, yeah. So basically, both the user and the treater have to designate a legally responsible person. So with the treater, it would be in the letter of intent, and that person would be on the notice of authorization. And for the user, it would be on that user plan to comply in the NOA. So it really is supposed to mean the legally responsible person for either or. Is that? But if it sounds like it doesn't look like it's reading that way. So we can think about that.
Yeah, now that I understand what you're saying, where, you know, definitely NOI makes a big difference, and obviously that's the treater for sure, and the NOA is the user. I wonder if there's a way to maybe just have that somehow add that into this definition. That makes it acceptable. I mean, I definitely think you need some legal responsible person to have that added. It's just separating it out as to where the responsibilities are. Again, I know a treater can be a user, or a user, I guess, yeah. You know, with all those back and forth on that, I just was wanting to make sure I understood how this was being applied. But from the intent of having the definition based on the NOI and also based on an NOA, I can see where you would want to have that, but just maybe making that a little bit more clear. So thanks.
Thank you. Alrighty. Does anyone else have any comments of agreement or disagreement on this one? Or any ideas? Doesn't have to be agree, disagree. Okay. All right, let's see what's next here, Marianne. So when during the last rulemaking, you know, we added site manager for some of the uses, and then we also added site manager responsibilities and treater responsibilities for certain uses. And within those responsibilities, we use the term repetitive violator, or I think we even use the word recalcitrant violator. And so we were thinking that that's not really defined. in the regulation, what does it mean to be repetitive, to the point that some sort of, enforcement should be applied, although technically any violation of the regulation enforcement should occur. But we just thought that this definition might be helpful, and so the definition would be, repetitive violation or violator, any site and or user that has used reclaimed water in a manner that violates Regulation 84 at least 3 times with the same non-compliant behavior, has been basically educated and instructed to correct that behavior by division, the treater, the legally responsible person, and or the site manager. So, yay or nay, should we have this definition? And so let's talk about the verbiage as well.
So Gail here again. Do you want to make it specific and within a certain time frame, or 10 years ago there was 1 violation, and then 5 years ago there was 1, and now here we are with the 3rd one? Is it over the course of the entire lifetime of the facility, or within a shorter time frame? And does it allow for an entity being placed on a compliance schedule?
Mm-hmm. Good point. Thank you.
And in other regulations, they have, acute violations or chronic violations. I haven't seen recalcitrant in other regulatory language, but I don't know all regulations. That's a new one to me. You might want to keep it consistent with other violations languages.
That makes sense.
Yeah, we use recalcitrant in our MS4 permits. And
oh, okay. It's a good word.
Sherry, it looks like you agreed on Gail's comment. I wasn't sure if you wanted to add anything to that.
Nope, that's good.
Oops. Oh, wait, the poll just went away. Oh, there it is.
This is Donnie, and I think Gail captured many of our concerns succinctly. We need some time limits around that, and again, define it. I'm in full agreement that I can't just have an open-ended like compliance period to count those 3 times.
And this is John in Aurora Water. What's the ramification of this? How is this going to be incorporated within the enforceability aspect of Reg 84?
That is a great question. And I think that would be a great thing to talk about when we go into the topic of treater and user roles and responsibilities, which could include site managers' responsibilities as well, in terms of what sort of enforcement action could be applied. I kind of like the idea of a compliance schedule that Gail just brought up, perhaps. There's always been the, shut the water off option, but that doesn't really help anybody. So, that's something that I'd like to talk about more in that meeting, but I'm also open to hearing more about it now.
And this is Nathan Moore. I just wanted to throw out kind of just a general approach we've taken in some other permits, primarily the MS4 permit on this, because it is a very difficult, to try to define the point of noncompliance where a specific action would be required by the treater, and and I think that's clear that that's kind of what this is moving towards. And one way that's been addressed is to allow for off-ramp from that specific required action when the trigger is met. So the trigger being the definition of repetitive violation. And so something to kind of consider is there are options that we've applied in other permits for those off-ramps, which would be saying like once a repetitive violation is identified, you either enforce or you document the specific alternative approaches or reasons that an enforcement wasn't needed and put that in the file. And And I'm not saying that's the specific approach here, but just saying to keep in mind, just because a trigger isn't a permit, the trigger doesn't mean absolute as in driving an enforcement response. There could be options down the road.
So John, you just asked a question in the Zoom chat, said, your question said, shouldn't we have a discussion before the poll is presented? You know, we're certainly open to suggestions. The intent of this activity was just to ignite discussion just by showing agreeing and disagreeing. These are certainly not final answers, but it just allows us to, you know, have people take that moment to pause and then, you know, through an online format, kind of give that initial feedback and then be able to discuss it. But we're open to trying something new. If in the next question, we can do that and see if that works better. What do you think, Brandy?
I like that idea. I think that makes sense.
Okay, cool. Let's try it.
All right. Well, we're moving on to clarification items. We'll still have an opportunity to vote on these. Could you go to the next slide? Okay, so clarification items, what we mean by that are simply minor or maybe not so minor changes to eliminate or minimize confusion in the regulation and to sort of make the requirements and the verbiage more clear. So we have some areas where we think there could be some clarification, and but after we go through some of our suggestions, then we will have, and we also took some of these ideas from the last stakeholder meeting, just so you all know. But after we go through these, then we'll have the opportunity to use Jamboard and have you all participate and show, you know, put your notes up as to what else you think could use clarification in Regulation 84. Next slide. All right, so I guess we have two questions here. And so we'll have two different polls for this, I think. So one would be, should Regulation 84 have a table of contents where you could easily, you know, look at the table and say, okay, I'm a treater. Okay, I need to complete a letter of intent. Here's where that section is, you know. And then the second question will be, you know, should we move? So the currently, you know, there's water quality treatment standards, and then there's some additional treatment, filtration, and disinfection requirements for toilet flushing uses and non-commercial food crops and resident controlled food crops. And then the treatment for localized systems is about 2 sections or 3 sections later. And so we suggest that we move that treatment into sort of not the same section as the standards or the specific filtration and disinfection, but just under that, so that when you're looking at the regulation, you know, you're looking at treatment, it's sort of all together. So anyway, we will actually have a discussion about this and then we'll take a poll. So yeah, what are folks' thoughts on either of these?
Gail here, a table of contents would be very helpful.
Thank
This is
you.
John. I echo Gail. That makes it so much easier to read the regs. I actually made one myself for when we were doing the proposed new use of oil and gas, so I could kind of keep track of where sections were. As far as the localized treatment section, I guess the term that you have here, the categorical standards, is really throwing me for a loop. I just don't understand that. I also think, though, that as written, the requirements for the localized treatment section it makes the reg hard to read. And I agree that it probably should be organized somewhere else. But again, that term categorical standards Um, I really hope you can kind of explain that to me. Thank you.
Yeah, as an old industrial pre-treatment person from way back, categorical standards means a whole different thing to me.
Okay. Well, technically in the regulation, they're called reclaimed water categories, right? Category 1, Category 2, and Category 3. So that's pretty much all I mean is I'm referring to section 84.7.
Yeah, it's just categorical standards is a term of art for those other regulations.
Gotcha. Okay. Or yes, 84.7. So we call it reclaimed water categories and standards technically in the regulation. So if that still makes sense to everyone, we can keep that. I just called it categorical standards because in my head, that's what I think of. But that makes sense.
Brandy, this is Donine. I agree with John that we need to move that localized treatment section, but I don't really agree with putting it under 84.7. I would put it, because we broke out the additional requirements for toilet flushing, just do the same thing for localized, but keep it sequential. So you would have like 84.7 be just the standard standards for for everyone. And then 84.8 is the additional standards required for toilet flushing. And then 84.9 would be your localized treatment section. That would be my recommendation. And I don't know if that would make it easier or harder, but I just know where it is now makes the reg really hard to read and define stuff in.
Thank you. That was sort of my thought. Yeah, to keep it separate, it wouldn't be incorporated into, it would still be like, yeah, 84.9. So then 84.10 would be table A and all of those, if we chose to, go that route. So.
Randy, this is John. I sympathize with you if you go that route because it's really hard to change the numbering of that reg and still make it work. So from a formatting process, it's going to be a lot of work, but I kind of have to agree with that. It does need to be moved. Sorry.
It's okay. This is part of the job, doing that. So I anticipated there would be some number changes in this process. Okay, well now we take a poll. So let's go ahead and cue that up. All right, I think it looks like the action has, oh no, it's still happening. Give it a few more seconds. All right, I think it's safe that okay, Mark, did you want to make an additional comment?
No, I was just disagree based off of Donine's comment. So yes, it should be moved, but maybe break it out somewhere else.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you, guys. All right. I think it's safe that we can go forward. Any other comments real quick? All right. So in the last meeting, we had someone bring up that, some language in the regulation around what is prohibited in terms of uses would be helpful. I think that makes a lot of sense. So, you know, it would, we thought that we would just somewhere in there put, you know, reclaimed water use for any application that's not listed in section 84.9, which may wind up being 10 or 100 one day. And is it, so, sorry, let me back up. Reclaimed water use for any application that is not listed in 84.9 and authorized under regulation B4 is a violation of this regulation. You know, there could be, you know, the uses, the user, let's see, the uses are defined in the definitions section. So it may be that we need to be a little bit more specific in those definitions, perhaps. Therefore, when it's not listed as an approved use, you know, you can, or if it is listed as an approved use and you refer to it in definitions, and you could see that there are certain things missing from there, then that wouldn't be allowed, I guess. I'm probably just creating confusion right now. So let's hear everyone's thoughts on this.
Gail here again. It's a little, could use a little bit of tweak, because you need to be saying the application that is not listed in 84.9 and not authorized under regulation 84, or say neither listed nor authorized. That's all.
Yep. Thank you.
Actually, Brandy, this is Donine again. I don't support this language at all as written. I do think we need some language, but we have not defined our uses to make this definition usable. In other words, what is a zoo operation? Is it decorative fountains? Is it wash down? What exactly is authorized underneath that use? And some we have defined, but even landscape irrigation, there are times where my users will come to me and want to put a decorative fountain in a restricted area, you know, kind of off on its own. And we have allowed that under landscape irrigation because they're controlling it with their irrigation system. It's not impacting human health. Kids aren't playing in it. It's really just a small spray that doesn't even splash out of the fountain kind of thing. But if you were to go by really what landscape irrigation implies, it would not be allowed. So we have to do one or the other, either truly define our uses or somehow narrow this prohibition.
Thank you. So in other words, this didn't clarify anything at all. Just kidding.
So I think this is a good discussion. For the division, I think it's very important that there be very clear understanding of what those authorized uses are. And I think up until now, I think we had sort of been assuming that those uses are fairly specific in the regulation, and so there was some general understanding of what they would include and not include. If we need to have more specificity about what those uses do and do not authorize, I think that is a good discussion that we also need to have. But that doesn't, not needing to have more specificity around those uses doesn't negate the need to have some clear language that makes it clear to folks that if you know, don't, if the uses, if you're trying to use this reclaimed water for something other than is listed in regulation 84, it's a violation of the regulation. So I think we need both. I think we need this language, and to the extent that there is confusion about what is authorized, let's have that discussion.
And this is Nathan. I also want to clarify just to make sure there's no misconceptions. The regulation currently does include a requirement that only uses authorized in an NOA issued by the division that you know defines those and allows those uses are allowed. So the example given right now of decorative fountains being used is currently a violation of Reg 84. And one we would take pretty serious. This proposed change is just to make sure the language is more direct, to make this violation a direct violation instead of having to have a two-step listing of the violation of you don't have an NOA, you have to have an NOA for your use that lists your use, you're in violation. So this is meant to increase clarity, not to create a new violation. So so everyone knows, if you have a use, any use at your sites that isn't specifically authorized in your NOA, so if you have a decorative fountain at a site, any site, anywhere, since that's not an authorized use, that is currently a violation. And if anyone has that confusion, kind of like we just discovered with a few people with recreational uses and ponds, I'd say contact the division right away and self-disclose that. It'd be better than having it discovered during an audit.
And Nathan, this is Donine again. I should probably clarify, we don't have any reclaimed decorative fountains. We have some non-pot users, it's raw water decorative fountains, but I was using that as an example and I probably misspoke. So my apologies. My system, my irrigation users for reclaimed water are using it just for that grass.
That's good. I'm like, Donine, you know this. I was very confused. So
Sorry,
thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
I had a little heart attack here.
Sorry, didn't mean to
No
cause
problem.
that.
Thanks.
This is John in Rural Water. So based on Nathan's statement that an NOA is required, and if you don't have the NOA, and also that would also roll back up to the NOI requirement that the treater has to have a modified NOI to then get the NOA approved. I mean, this is just kind of a redundancy. It might be an overall clarification, as you know, you've alluded, Meg, but the fact is it's redundancy, and is it really necessary is what I'm curious about. I mean, they already have the requirements to follow specific administrative requirements, and then, you know, adding something else is just, it's superfluous language. So.
And I think this is Nathan again. I do think you're making a very good point there. This is in a way a redundancy. So I guess, you know, that is something that should be taken into consideration when identified to be supported. I think, but one of the reasons we do believe this redundancy makes sense is it honestly took the division quite a bit of review, and we had to bring our Attorney General's office in it just to figure out how to develop the citation of an unauthorized use, which is clearly the intent of the statute. It's really convoluted to get to how an unauthorized use is a violation legally in a citation of the reg. And so, yes, it is a redundancy, but it's a redundancy of a very convoluted violation to make it a simple violation. And that's the goal here. But I do hear what you're saying, and that should be a consideration. But that's why we're, I think, recommending this one, especially from our client's point of view. It ends up being a quarter-page violation, trying to cite it, and we're going to lose half of our audience. And I think they might understand what they're in violation of by the time they get to.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, Nathan. Would that then lead you to think about possibly removing or reducing some of the repetitive language in the NOI, NOA area, clarifying that, and then just having this as, you know, more overarching clarified language regarding an unapproved use? I mean, I agree. But you know, trying to just clarify and keeping things simple is just what goes through my mind. But yeah, I mean, I think we should have a pretty good discussion here.
Yeah, and definitely looking at other simplifications this might allow for, that would make a lot of sense.
John, this is Liz Lamont. I just wanted to clarify real quick. When you're referring to an NOI, what exactly were you meaning? A UPC, a user plan to comply?
No, the notice of intent that the treater would have to submit, because you would have a new, if you have to do a new NOA, don't you have to upgrade the NOI to include that NOA into it?
I'm sorry.
My understanding.
It's an LOI. a letter
Oh.
of intent. So I just wasn't sure which document you were referring to.
Okay, sorry about that.
Oh,
Letter of
not at all.
intent as opposed. That's
I
fine.
just wanted to
Sorry.
clarify.
Okay, that was very good discussion. I think we got a lot out of that in terms of what to go do in the background. All right, let's move to the next, please. Okay, Meg, I think you were going to take it from here for a little bit.
Yeah. So now we wanted to introduce kind of impoundments. Just as by way of background, impoundments are not only regulated by Regulation 84, but by Regulation 61, which is the Colorado discharge permitting regulations. And in those regulations, it requires that impoundments receive a permit, a groundwater discharge permit, unless, and there's an exception, unless the seepage from the impoundment does not exceed the amount that you see on your slide. So this is kind of one of our basic existing discharge permit, sort of requirements, right? If you're discharging to groundwater, which you would if your seepage exceeds this number, you need a discharge permit. Next slide, please. So I think this has been something that has been a bit of a confusion for folks in Regulation 84. So there's current language in Regulation 84 around impoundments, limiting their location in terms of you can't be within 100 feet of a domestic well in some situations. But in terms of this very specific requirement that you need to meet these seepage, your impoundment has to be lined, or it has to meet these seepage requirements, or you need to get a discharge permit, that has not been spelled out as explicitly as it could have been in Regulation 84. And so we've put some language here that we'd be proposing to really clarify this existing regulation and this existing requirement. I know this is something that folks have strong feelings on, so I'd love to hear your questions and comments.
Hey, Meg, can you share any information regarding the request that went out last November or October that asked for information about impoundments? Do you have any of that information that you can share with us and let us know what's going on?
So that I think that would be a question for Nathan.
Sorry, I was 2 screens away. I'm not sure. I'm going to say that's a better question for Liz. When we get those audits and the responses, we will be putting them into our records manager system, or whatever is called when it's revised or pre-sound them into one public table. But given that there's not that many treaters, but I'm not sure where we are on getting all that information received and scanned. Obviously getting things into our file room takes a little longer right now. Liz, do you know where we are on that?
Sorry, this is Liz. I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself. John, were you wondering about the purpose or the results of the letters that went out?
The results.
Well, we were looking for two very different results. The first one was impoundments that were being used for unauthorized purposes, namely recreational purposes. And we did have a few positive responses on that. Of course, those were halted immediately. I could not give you a treater by treater list of how many unlined impoundments we have. but I would put the number at well over 100.
And Liz, just to clarify, the well over 100 number might not be online impoundments, but impoundments for which we have not gone through an official seepage rate certification and exclusion study, right?
Impoundments that the treaters or the users were unable to verify any type of seepage rate.
So it's possible that some of those will meet the seepage rate study when the treater gets to that point.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Okay. And then just to further on and to jump ahead, because to anticipate the question I think we'll get, is those surveys that everyone was required to identify the impoundments they had. Those surveys have been received now, correct? For most treaters, I know there was.
Yeah, I've had a few stragglers, but for the most part, yeah.
And those, but they're probably not in records manager yet, right?
No, they are not.
Okay, so I think we could probably commit to get those that we've received into records manager, and then you could review those, and if anyone could review them by just pulling up the treaters files and looking at the most recent documents. I think we could commit to getting those in records manager before the next stakeholder meeting.
I certainly think that's possible. Some of it depends on we are changing our records management system. So we've never ever had a problem with changing over technology ever in the history of the CDPHE. So this should go really smoothly.
We'll say I think it's fair to expect that we'll get them in. I mean, if for some reason we don't, we'll let you guys know. But we'll try to get those in by the next stakeholder meeting, so people could view them. Oops, they're curious about the responses. We'll do our best. I anticipate we can make that happen. So I think that if you have any other questions.
So Nathan, really quick, just for the most part, we're coming in pretty clear, but then there's just little bits where you're cutting out. I don't know if any adjustments can be made on your end to help.
Yeah, I apologize about that. I was dealing with some noise outside my window right there. Am I better now?
Lately, yeah.
I think you're all right, but yeah, we'll let you know if you
okay.
cut out.
Sorry about that. Thanks, everyone.
But I think you cut out, but everyone, if anyone has any other questions for Nathan or Liz, and in case you couldn't tell, Liz was being facetious and was joking about, technology transfers. There's always some little hiccups, but as Nathan said, we'll get some information out there if there are any delays in getting that information up. So thanks, Liz and Nathan, for committing that to the stakeholders. Is there any other? I think Meg, you're still looking for other feedback on this.
Yeah. If folks have thoughts on this clarification language, I think that would be helpful.
Gail here. Does it seem to the treaters that it would be burdensome to maintain a list of all CDPS permits and permit certification numbers along with the location and owner of the impoundment? Or is that something the treaters already do?
Does the treater want to take this one?
This is Donine with Colorado Springs Utilities. We don't have a lot of impoundments containing reclaimed water, but yes, I can see that for larger systems, especially that have significant number of golf courses, that this could become burdensome very quickly. And the reason I call out golf courses is because I know in our system, because they draw so much water, that's where our impoundments are, so that we can fill their pond and they can water out of their own pond. But yes, it could become burdensome, and it could become quite expensive also for both user and treater to do the studies and that kind of thing.
So to be clear, the studies are an existing requirement. We're not proposing adding that requirement. That's an existing requirement of Regulation 61 that users should already be complying with. What we're proposing here is a clarification in regulation 84. You've already got, so treaters already have this existing requirement to ensure that their users are in compliance, right? This is trying to be more specific and clarifying what that would mean. And part of what that means is ensuring that your users are not discharging to state waters without authorization.
And just to be clear, this is concerning discharges from impoundments, not discharges into impoundments.
Correct. This is when you have an impoundment full of reclaimed water and it is discharging to state waters, in this case groundwater, without permit authorization.
Thank you.
So for one more clarification on this, as far as the burden of tracking the numbers, I think the division's hope would be that the majority of these should be lined. You know, I don't think most facilities are wanting to waste groundwater to, or you know, reclaimed water that they're paying for to groundwater. So we're hoping that the majority of these would meet the seepage rate study and therefore not need a permit, or that if they didn't, the improvements would be made as necessary to make sure that they were lined, which I think probably was the intent of most of these impoundments, hopefully. Obtaining a permit would, number one, result in unnecessary pollutant loading to groundwater, you know, even though authorized by a permit, but also of just, you know, wasting resources.
Hey, Nathan and Meg, is John. I agree that all the impoundments should have been lined, but obviously we're talking a lot of golf courses, and they can go back a significant number of years. But would there be a way of using, you know, basically, I don't know, filling an impoundment and then measuring over a period of time that says, okay, we haven't lost any water other than an evaporation rate, therefore we assume it's lined. I mean, again, it gets back to that historical impoundment that was, you know, installed, you know, back in the 50s or even earlier, potentially in some places. But, you know, I mean, I don't know what kind of regulations would have possibly existed back then, and just trying to find an easy way for someone to say, hey, we've done a best approach to say that we're not allowing our water in the impoundment to go to groundwater, that if we lose any, it's either through evaporation or through use, maybe by monitoring, you know, winter levels in an impoundment. We could turn around and be able to justify it. And I know, hopefully, that would be a way of not getting around, but basically saying Reg 84 is a way of justifying that there's a liner, as opposed to talking about Reg 61 and the requirements of putting in, you know, this seepage, or doing a study to a seepage rate. I'm just trying to think of some way of being able to allow some of the older locations, some of those 100 impoundments that may not be able to definitively state that there's a liner, to give them a way of being in compliance, and, you know, reducing your burden there at the division for having to track and maintain all that information. So I guess I'm looking for a win-win situation for treaters, users, and the division that would allow this impoundment issue to, you know, kind of be covered correctly. Just a thought.
We will take that back. Thanks, John. Are there any other comments on this proposed language? All right, Randy, what do I do next? Is there
Sorry. Okay. I think that I think we have a poll set up for this, Caitlin, do we? I thought we did. Yay, yeah, we do. So I guess this is more around not the pieces and parts of the requirements or potential actions to be taken later, but more about the verbiage that we've, yeah, the verbiage that we have here being agreed to or not. And I think Meg said this, but we would keep the current language in regulation and also want to include the clarification language. So it wouldn't be either or, it would be both.
Thanks, Brandy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, vote away.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Does anyone have any last comments on this before we move forward?
Great.
Okay, let's go.
All right, so everyone, we're going to be, the division only selected what they thought may be areas that needed clarifying. But we'd like to hear if there's anything else that needs to be, maybe simplified, or just any other ideas that people have out there. So we're going to be bringing up this Jamboard. I believe we used it the last time. But basically, this is just our online whiteboard where the best use for it is just doing sticky notes. So you can see here, you've got your icons, and the fourth one down is your sticky note. Once you click on that, then you can write, the ideas you have for the areas that you would like simplified or just clarified in general. And you press save, and then you should be able to see your sticky note on there. So we're just going to take 5 minutes to start off with and see how many ideas we get put on the board in that time, and then extend it if we need to. Let's see, I am going to chat everyone, wherever my chat is, the link here. So everyone should see it in the chat box, and you can just select on that and open it up. And again, we'll just kind of take the 5 minutes to start off with. And it can be anything in the reg, right, Brandy? No specific section or?
That is correct.
All right.
Curiosity, when I'm on the Jamboard, I keep seeing these little notices about anonymous skunk, anonymous chipmunk joined and stuff like that. What are those?
That's you. The Google will make people anonymous if they don't have Gmail accounts, and so so everyone, all the tigers and the antelopes and the dolphins, those are the stakeholders who are joining this Jamboard.
I want to be anonymous otter.
I don't know if they give you a choice, but we can pretend that you're the otter. All right,
I feel sorry for the skunk. It's just
I'm gonna just leave it up here.
Well, you do have the option of, oh, a dingo's up there now, of signing your jam notes so that we can tell who you are, right? Or you could just choose to remain anonymous.
Yes, either way. what we would like is, you know, you don't have to write your name on there. If you want to use your animal name, you are welcome to do so. But we would, you know, as you're putting sticky notes, this is just for those who want to kind of take a step back and just kind of stop and think about the regulation. It's that time to do so. And then we'd love to hear maybe additional thoughts on whatever you might wrote if it needs clarifying, or just any other comments you might want to add to it. Hard to fit all thoughts onto a sticky note sometimes. All right, I'm gonna start the timer now so that, you know, it looks like we've got a number of people on. So again, this is the time to make this regulation what it needs to be to help people understand it, so that, you know, it's easier for you to work with your constituents and make it easier to meet the intent and also to meet the regulations, not get violations. All right. I love it. We've got a couple more people writing, so let's give it a few more minutes. All right. Let's, so we're just looking at the time and also looking at how much we have to cover. So this, so what we're going to do is we're going to keep these, we won't go through any one of them, but if there's anyone, Brandy, I'm gonna tag you. Is there any comment in here that you might have a question on right now so that we can get that clarification now? Or do they all make sense?
I think they all make sense. Yes, they all make sense.
Okay, so I'm going to have you put these in your back pocket. If we have time at the end, we can go back to it, but let's move on to the other sections so that we can make sure we get through everything, since we only have a half hour left. Does that sound good?
Great.
Cool. All right.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about sort of consolidating the additional conditions or best management practices. So next slide, please, Marianne. What I did is I went through the regulation, or we went through the regulation, and we looked at the best management practices in 84.9 as well as the UPC requirements in 84.12 and anywhere else, really the whole reg. And found areas of repetitiveness with regards to some of these requirements as they pertain to uses. So in that review, where there was repetition and where it seemed that there could be applicability to every use, that's what we are about to sort of talk about with you guys. And so again, I'll be sort of quickly, because of time, showing where the areas of repetitiveness are located in Reg 84, and then show you some of the some proposed language for consolidating the BMP and to be applicable to every use. So we're thinking about the minimum requirements in the BMP as well as it applying to all uses. And then we'll do the poll and the discussion. And it sounds like discussion first is sort of what we prefer, to hear everyone else's ideas before we take the poll. So we'll go that route. Are there any questions about that right now? Okay, all right, let's move on to the next slide. So the first one is education and training. It really does apply to every use. There is a requirement for every use to have an education and training program, mainly through the administration section and the reuse system management plan to describe what that is for the treater. But then also in 84.9, there are lots of different uses that have an education and training requirement attached to them. And then in the UPC requirements, there are also areas where it's called out. So next slide, please. So we thought, an education and training requirement should be applicable to all uses, and this should include at minimum, what is reclaimed water, that it is non-potable, that it's not for drinking, and the category of water that you're using. That there should be hand washing and or sanitizing after handling reclaimed water, or anything that's delivering or being irrigated with reclaimed water. The users should be educated on where the reg is located to go, for reference, as well as any educational materials that are associated to it. They must be educated on the required best management practices that must be implemented per their use and category. And then there would be a signature or some sort of verification that each user received training. And then, of course, this training program would be described in the user plan to comply, which is something that's already required. So I don't think this is similar to what we started to require for non-commercial crops and the residential irrigation. And I think at minimum, I think these are not too much, too hard, too much to ask. So anyway, we'd love to hear your thoughts, and then we'll do the poll.
This is John at Rural Water. One of the things that's missing is tools in all of this. I mean, this is basically looking at how it impacts human health. But, you also should be looking at, contamination issues that could potentially occur, specifically from the area of tools. So just thought that might be added in here.
You mean tools like that? What do you mean by tools? Tools for education or tools that use reclaimed water?
No, that the mechanic or maintenance staff would use those kind of tools.
Okay. Yeah.
These are all tools that should be part of the educational process out there, but we should also explain how other pieces of equipment, maybe that would be the best way to state it, equipment could be contaminated and the cross-contamination that could occur. I mean, if you got somebody working on a reclaimed water system irrigation line, you don't want them using those same tools to handle a drinking water fountain or a urinal or commode inside the buildings or something like that, especially, as you start looking at the localized treaters. Some of those requirements could go into, if they happen to be able to treat that water down to reuse it. So, I think definitely need to consolidate the education and training, but we need to expand as to what are the topics covered. And it's, just providing some of these specifics in here, but also taking a look at it from just a broader picture and, training of people that may come inside and in touch with it, such as a contractor. How would all of that get included, and just having one area and having it as, I guess, as many options as possible in there, as many items covered in it, and just having that referred to everybody must meet this requirement is the way I sort of look at it. Just kind of make it one location with everything contained in it, and that's the education training component.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. That makes sense. And when we get into the one of the topics that we'll talk about at one of the next meetings is the helpful training materials. And so I think that we'll be able to get into some of those details maybe and with as well when we talk about that. But I do agree that, this should apply to basically anything that reclaimed water is associated with and anyone who's associated with any of that.
That's Brett with Westminster. Yeah, when we do our training slides, we'll mention that with the tools that, garden hoses, water tanks, backflow, the testing kits for testing backflows, that if you use it on reclaim once, it always has to be used on reclaim because they track the serial numbers on that on the testing kits. And if they see it's been done on a potable backflow, then we have to go and we've talked to the tester and let them know that they can't do that, and they no longer are allowed to use that kit in Westminster on potable systems.
That's a great idea.
Actually, one more thing too, is Brad again, that I got a bunch of rolls of duct tape made with like our little city reclaim signs on it. And we hand that out to contractors so they can mark tools, hoses, and stuff with that as a reminder that that's for the reclaim sites only.
That's really awesome. I didn't know you could have such awesome duct tape that said reclaim water.
That's really cool, Brett. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, Brandy. Next time I see you, I'll give you a couple rolls of it. I've got boxes.
We'll have too much fun with that.
Oh, trust me, people do.
Hey, Brett, I honestly know a lot of treaters. This is Liz Lamont, a lot of treaters and users who would probably be very interested in how you acquired that. And I'd love to pick up a couple rules the next time I see you.
Sure. Yeah, I can. I'll have the information up, and then yeah, I'll get with you, and I can give you some rolls.
All right. Okay, I guess we will go ahead and take our poll. We are going to run out of time today. It is clear. So, do we agree or disagree that this should be applied to all uses? Is first question basically, and then do we agree or disagree with the minimum requirements?
Brandy, this is Liz. Could you clarify minimum requirements just a little bit more?
Yeah, the minimum requirements within the best management practice of education and training. So like these bullets that are listed here on the slide, like those would be the minimum requirements in any education and training program for any user.
Thank you.
All right. I don't mean to be rude and cut people off, but I'm going to try to get through as many of these as we can. So thank you for your feedback on that one, and we shall move on. So cross connection is something that comes up a lot in Regulation 84, and I've showed all of this here. And in some areas, it requires a licensed plumber. In other areas, it requires cross connection controls for potable. And then we also require cross-connection control for any other water source. So there, and then in some areas we require, a certified technician test the cross-connection prior to and also regularly. Anyhow, next slide, please. So the division thinks that, cross-connection control, it should just state any other water source, whether it be potable or well water or what have you, gray water even. It should be an approved device or method that has been tested and certified by a certified cross-connection control technician. There should be initial tests and interval testing for any cross-connection control device, which I think is pretty standard for a lot of utilities to do this anyway. And any conveyances, which we may not keep that word, or other equipment that is attached to the reclaimed water system also needs to have cross connection. And then of course, as usual, the program about cross connections should be described in the user plan to comply. So I think this covers everything for cross connection. So let's go ahead and have a discussion about this. Thoughts?
This is Liz. I just wanted to toss in that quite often when I do user site inspections, they state that the treater's requirements for cross connection and rules like this are much stricter than we put in place. And that is certainly the right of treaters to do that. This doesn't prohibit you in any way from making a more strict program. This would just be the division minimum.
All right, I'm not hearing much, so maybe we should just jump to the Zoom.
Let's do the
Any?
poll. Yes, please. Yeah, so again, question 1 is, should it apply to all uses? And 2 is, are the bullets here that are listed as minimum requirements seem appropriate? All right. Again, I'm just, in the interest of time, going to move forward. But as always, you can contact me anytime with any comments and questions on this. So we all know that with regards to landscape irrigation, the agronomic rate must be met. There's also, prevention of ponding and runoff with irrigation and all the uses, really. And so we thought that there's a way to consolidate sort of ponding, runoff, agronomic rate, and sort of the fate of the wastewater, if it's collecting or whatnot, to be applied to all uses. So next slide, please. All right, so consolidation. So to address ponding and runoff, and in the case of irrigation and dust suppression, it would be to minimize, because in those two uses, it's just kind of a unfortunate result of the use sometimes. But in all other uses, it should be completely prevented. So that would sort of be the verbiage there. And then, repairing leaks immediately would be required, or that the use of the reclaimed water should be discontinued until the leak can be repaired. Again, if it's irrigation of any kind, the agronomic rate should be applied. And then flood and sheet irrigation, which is sort of an old school way of irrigating large farms, basically, that would be prohibited. And then, the fate of any wastewater would be, doing something to prevent discharge, such as lining or a catchment basin, like with a car wash, or having a discharge permit when needed. So that being said, what are your thoughts? Okay, did we accidentally mute everyone, or?
No, we're still here.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for hanging on.
Let's go ahead and do the Zoom poll, and then if we see if anyone disagrees, let's hear those thoughts. But
okay.
Brandy, this is Donine.
Mm-hmm.
As I was going through this, I also noticed some inconsistencies in which we noted the additional BMP, I'm just gonna call it that, for certain uses. Like, I'll just give you an example. Like for restricted landscape, access landscape irrigation, it doesn't list the runoff stipulation that you have to minimize it. And so, and it's like, well, they're still using it for irrigation. It should still be listed. Just if we keep table A, we may need to go back and confirm that we've got all of the additional management requirement, additional conditions required listed for all the uses.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. We do have one person that disagrees with the listed requirements. So what can we hear about that?
We want to make sure that, you know, we're going to be moving forward kind of with some of this feedback. So if anyone's in disagreement with one of the listed requirements, that'll help us make sure that we're incorporating that feedback as we're considering this. Okay.
Okay.
And you're always welcome to email Brandy, either through email or phone call. Either way works. But without comments today, we're kind of going in assuming that everyone's in agreement with this language. So certainly, please let us know, you know, if you disagree and what your thoughts are behind it. All right. So Brandy, we've only got about 3 minutes. I'm just wondering if now is the time to kind of talk about next steps and how we want to move forward, since we didn't get through all the presentation slides.
Yes, I think we should do that. So why don't we, I guess, yeah, go ahead and skip down to, we'll just not go over the timeline. That was just more of a reminder. So next steps would be, so I guess since we didn't get to finish today's meeting, if any of you have, you know, the time to send me additional feedback on the things that we didn't get to cover, such as the rest of the BMPs to be consolidated. Another big one was the site manager application to all uses, and then the structure of Regulation 84, meaning like the order of things. Then please do send it my way. We do have quite a bit more to cover going forward, but I can try to see if we have time to finish up this polling process or go over those topics for a little while at the beginning of our next stakeholder meeting. I can't guarantee though. So our next meeting is, I believe it's August 26th. And it will also be a Zoom meeting, and it will be from 1 to 3 p.m. And in terms of the topics to be covered, we will be sending that out shortly. And I did want to ask a quick question. Did any of you like the fact that we sent you some kind of a sort of an assignment prior to the meeting? Or did you find that helpful or more so annoying? I think, you know, for us, it's really helpful because this was a lot of content. Clearly, we didn't even get through. And, you know, we wanted everyone to come prepared. So does anyone have anything they want to, any feedback on that?
Gail here. I thought it was helpful to have it focused and give us specific things to review ahead of time.
Thank you.
I agree with that. This is Donnie.
This is Sherry. I agree.
Great.
So everyone, I just sent out an evaluation form through the chat. You know, getting feedback on how this meeting went will help us improve the future meetings. As Brandy said, you know, there's still a lot more to cover in the last meeting, so I don't know if we'll be able to go through each one and do a Zoom poll. It does help, you know, with the conversation, but we may have to just do a quick open discussion on it the last time. But we try to use these different tools to get the conversation going. And so I think knowing that it's helpful to send out materials ahead of time, that's something we've taken note of, and try to do that, for other stakeholder meetings as well. We always try to get the materials out early, but bear with us when we end up sending them out just days before the meeting. There's always a lot going on, and we're always trying to keep up with things. So thanks for your patience on that. So if you guys don't mind just taking time to review the evaluation form, that would be great. I did want to bring up, just a quick reminder of this timeline. You guys have, right now we currently have 2 other meetings scheduled to talk about all of this. We're going to reflect back on this meeting and see how we can kind of try to condense things and fit it all into those 2 meetings while still ensuring we have a robust discussion. But then there's still time to work through this before it's actually proposed to the commission in 2022. So that's, again, just reminding everyone where we're at in this phase. So thanks for bearing with us as we go a little bit over. And again, thanks for just taking the time to fill out that evaluation form.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation today. It was super helpful.
Can't get into the evaluation form. It says it requires permission.
Oh gosh, I thought I changed those settings. I'm so sorry, everyone. Let me go do that right now.
Thank you all so much for participating today. We really appreciated all of the feedback, and this was a long meeting, and thank you so much. It was incredibly helpful. And thank you, Brandy, for directing us, being our captain.
Does anybody in particular, this is Liz Lamont, anybody in particular need any of our specific contact information in order to follow up with us on specific things? The reason I mention that is because calling us is really not the best option, whereas email is.
What is the best way to provide feedback for the slides that we didn't get to today? To whom should we send that feedback?
Brandy, am I out of line in saying it's you?
Nope, that would be me.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, with that, I guess we are done here. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time, hopefully.
We'll leave the Zoom poll open just a little bit longer so that we can, I'm sorry, not the Zoom poll, the Zoom platform, just so that the evaluation form is still available. But take your time, do what you need to do with it. Thank you again, everyone.